Welcome to Personal Injury Marketing Minute.
Welcome to the Personal Injury Marketing Minute, where we quickly cover the hot topics in the legal marketing world. I'm your host, Lindsey Busfield, the Vice President and Partner over at Optimize My Firm. Today, I'm joined by Kerri Coby White, the CEO of Kerri James. Kerri works with law firms around the country on intake, marketing, and growth systems, and she's developed a framework she calls the 5 T's of intake, which will be the topic of her upcoming PIMM presentation. In today's Spotlight on PILMA series, we're talking about how vital it is to have your intake in order and why law firms lose cases when intake isn't designed to convert. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kerri. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here. That was quite the tee up. Nicely done there.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. But tell us a little bit more about yourself. I know that you're an author, you have a business, you work with attorneys. Tell us everything.
Very busy. Yes, very busy indeed. Like you, cut my teeth rather in marketing, where I was constantly stressed by the immense responsibility that comes with stewarding someone's very large marketing investment. And so, because of that, I really doubled down on intake because I wanted to ensure that my clients weren't just getting clicks and calls, but that my clients were getting clients. And so, what I talked about endlessly is that clicks aren't clients. And the only way that we can really optimize that marketing budget is to solve for any of the intake issues that result in lead leak, or even more importantly, client leak. We want to make sure that those qualified leads are converted. So focusing on intake is one of the most important things to do when you're making that marketing investment. So before anybody wants to talk about marketing with me, I make them talk about intake, because the last thing I want to do is turn on volume in a firm that isn't ready and ends up losing money on that marketing spend.
Because that's such a stressful exercise in futility where you can spend thousands, if not millions of dollars in marketing, getting all these leads coming to the door. And then you look at your spreadsheet at the end of the day, and it's like, why don't I have any more clients coming in? Well, if
It
you have an intake team that is failing, whether it's in-house or virtual, or however it is that your intake is set up, if it's not converting, all that money is wasted. And it's what's worse is your reputation could be at stake if somebody's first impression of your firm is negative. And then they're going to go and tell everybody this firm didn't care about my case. They're cold. They are not doing their job well. So it is so important to get intake set up first. And I
yeah.
think the first thing that we need to talk about with this is, what should attorneys be using as they evaluate the success of their intake team, and what metrics, what KPIs should they be looking at to make sure that their intake is running smoothly?
Sure. Well, it's so interesting. Attorneys have gotten so much better over the last decade, and certainly since COVID, especially, at really knowing their numbers. And so, if we look back a decade ago, I was always talking to attorneys about their data, their data, their data, and I get some of those blank stares, like not really quite so sure what I was talking about. And we've come so far. I do believe that attorneys have become far more data driven than they were before COVID. And they do know that they are tracking the KPIs that really are going to move the needle in their business. Before that, I'd have someone who says, yeah, we get, 700 phone calls a month. And I don't know how many of those are leads, because we don't put them all in the system unless they're qualified. And so, it just became so wishy-washy. Nobody could tell me conclusively what they were spending, what they were generating, what they were converting, and what their ROI was, which that is the most important metric of all, is what are we spending and what are we getting for it? Because if that ROI is not really, as Ken over at Pilma would say, really at that 6x, if we're not getting to that 6x, then that marketing investment is creating a lot of work, but not necessarily a lot of profit. So in terms of the KPIs that I consider the absolute most important, the North Star, of course, is the lead to qualified lead conversion. So we want to know, how many leads did we generate? How many of those leads were qualified, and how many of those qualified leads converted? Now, that's just 3 tiny little data points that to me tell an awful lot of the story, that can help you identify where you need improvements. Because if you tell me we got 100 leads and we signed 20 cases, that doesn't actually mean anything to me because I don't know if you had 80 qualified leads or 20 qualified leads. You may have the best intake team or the worst intake team, and I can't tell from those two metrics alone. So the most important thing to know is what percentage of your leads are qualified. So in most marketing firms, that's going to be in that 20 to 40% range. If you're focused largely on referral-based business, you're going to see that much, much higher. And then, of course, what percent of the qualified leads are you converting? Because we can't convert an unqualified lead. So
Right.
there's no sense in measuring against that. So if you tell me we had 20 qualified leads and signed 19, now you're looking at a 95% conversion of qualified leads, and you get my big shiny star sign of approval on stamp of approval on that one. So qualified lead conversion is where we need to focus. And if your lead quality is really poor, then we want to focus on the marketing side of things. And if your qualified conversion is poor, then we need to focus on intake a lot.
Then that's so true because all of these different numbers mean something and are actionable in some way. And so you're right. If those leads coming in are not quality, then you need to be evaluating where are you getting these leads from? What is your marketing team doing that is generating the most qualified leads versus the least
Right.
and
And you
figure
need to
out.
have that information very, very accessible. When I talk about folks where they are on their data journey, there are folks who are like, I've got tons of data, but it takes me a long time to wrangle it. Like where I have to go to get, I've got to go check how many calls here and then talk to the team about how many of those were leads and then check in the system whether or not they were qualified. So we want to streamline that process and make sure that it's clear that I can look at that any which way. And I'll give you an example. I was just before we got on today looking at one of my clients' data, and all month the numbers have been good. Like the tippy top numbers, which are, lead volume is steady. And this is a long-term client of mine, steady as Sears. I mean, we got this thing operating like a coin operated machine. But then all of a sudden this month something changed dramatically with the number of signups. And so I have to go and do a deeper dive and say, okay, do we have a lead quality or a qualified conversion issue? And where that data points me is important to making any of the corrections that we need to make. So we want to have data that is another one of my little ditties here: centralized, visualized, analyzed, and mobilized. So we need to get the data layered on top of itself, meaning marketing data on top of intake data on top of institutional data. So we know what we're talking about. Then we need to visualize it because that's going to help us make sense of it. I've been telling people for 30 years since I was a teacher that you got to squint at graphs to really get a sense of the direction. And that's more important than the individual data point in many cases. So squint at your data, see what it's doing, and then analyze it. What does this mean? What should we do? How should we position ourselves based on this? And the last part, that fourth step when you're looking at your data, is to mobilize. Well, now you know something, so what are we going to do about it? And that's the part I think most people seem to miss when it comes to looking at that data.
Well, and I think that attorneys can become overwhelmed when it comes to collecting the data. And so, where along the journey are you collecting each of these points? Who is it that says this is a qualified lead that's coming in and recording that? Because that's clearly one of the biggest pieces to this puzzle.
So I think every role in the firm has different KPIs, and so the KPI that I want the attorneys focused on first and foremost is the return on ad spend. So what we're not even, that's focused purely on the marketing, but just ROI. Like that's the metric for you as a business owner. What are we spending and what are we generating as a result of that? And not even just generating, but truly profiting. Profit versus revenue. You've got lots of $1 million companies out there that aren't profiting $1 million.
Right.
They're
They're
invoicing.
generating it, but it's
They're
not going to
generating,
anybody's
but they're
pocket.
not turning it into profit. So I want the attorney focused first and foremost on profits, and then from there, the attorney should be focused on return on investment for that marketing investment and case costs. Because I want to know if we've gotten to the point where, like I said, we're operating like a coin operated machine, and we have a very favorable case acquisition cost. Well, then I want to ramp that up. Okay. So now the attorney can say, all right, based on the data that I see here, I want to invest this much because I feel like we have room there. Great. The manager of the intake department has other KPIs. They've got to get much more granular. They need to know, okay, so the attorney is satisfied with the case acquisition costs and is looking to invest more. Therefore, I need to look at my team availability. Do I have bandwidth for more? Do I have somebody ready to catch the phone the next ring that comes? So they're looking at share of the workload, speed to lead. How quickly are these calls being answered? Are we missing calls, God forbid? How long are leads sitting in our pipeline? How effective is the team on the call? Are we getting more than 80% of those calls closed on the first call? That one call could close is really important to me. So the intake supervisor is getting much more in the weeds. Then I've got the marketing individual who, they may have one or two channels that any marketing person is managing that they have to be super focused on. So while collectively as a firm, the attorney is focused on the case acquisition at large, the marketing team has to be focused on those individual campaigns. And so every group within the system has their own KPIs. What's important is that we don't exist simply in silos, that we bring all of this data together. One of the, you mentioned the 5T. Let's touch on that real quick because we haven't even gotten there. But the 5T is the team who's going to be responsible for this, the tools, what tools do they need to do their job best, tactics, what tactics will they employ to hit their targets, which is the next T, and tracking toward those targets. Okay, so the team, the tools, the tactics, the targets, and the tracking. So now, if we have everybody with their own KPIs, we need to bring them together and make sure that we're looking across these departments. So when I've got an intake team that is really well defined, they know their role, they're also meeting with marketing, and marketing, it has to have what this feedback loop, what we call our system loop, is this constant feedback between marketing and intake so that the campaigns improve by virtue of the results within the intake department. And then of course everybody's pointing upline to the partner, to the attorney, who is ultimately responsible for ensuring the success of this organization.
Absolutely. And so much of this is that team and that team mentality. And one of the biggest parts of the team are the intake members. So what mistakes are you seeing along the way when you're looking at either the intake team, whether they're in-house or virtual? Um, what issues are you regularly seeing come up that are costing those cases and not converting the
Yeah.
qualified leads into cases?
So the single biggest threat to intake departments is not getting the lead in the
Yeah.
first place. So we want to, not unlike the data, we also want to make sure that all of the leads are centralized. We can't have leads going into inboxes and onto spreadsheets and sent via email. We need to make sure that all the leads are coming into a unified system where they are being managed. If we go back over the last, 5 to 10 years, 10 years ago, nobody was using a lead management system. We've gotten, I'd say, about 50% of firms using a lead management system, and there's still room for folks to increase their buy into that technology. Once we have a lead, the second biggest risk second to missing a lead is being too slow to respond to a lead. People are very, very fickle. If we don't respond to an inquiry immediately, chances of getting that person on the phone diminish, and they've already moved on in all likelihood. So we want to make sure that we are engaging leads quickly, and that's another KPI that I track very closely. What percentage of our leads are truly engaged? So we've got leads, engaged leads, qualified leads, and signed clients. So my unresponsive leads, the ones that we never actually communicate with, they should be less than 2%. And I think that's being very generous. The next part is certainly the call handling itself. So how are these individuals when they pick up the phone? Are they meeting the moment? And I hate to say it because we've been working on all of these tactics for a long time. It's hard to meet the client's needs if you're busy doing an intake. And what I mean by that is somebody who called your law firm did not call to complete an intake. They called for a free case evaluation. They called because they have a question. They called because they're not sure if they have a case. And our duty in that moment is to meet their needs before meeting ours. So we need to realign what intake actually means. It means meeting the needs of a client and leading them to the natural conclusion that we should indeed do an intake. Well, why don't we get this thing started right here and now? So those are just a few of the problems between actually generating this lead and signing a client. So a lot can go wrong along the way. The other thing, we were talking about these people, these defined roles. Everything is so integrated and connected between our campaigns and phone systems and lead delivery. One of the things the team has to be doing to ensure that there's no lead loss is making sure these things are always operating, that forms don't break, phone numbers don't get spammed. Yeah, there's a lot that needs to be constantly tested to ensure that it's working and that we're not losing leads in any way. So at least on a monthly basis, I mean, imagining a month could possibly go by without spotting things makes me insane. But at a minimum, on a monthly basis, you're testing your chatbot, testing your forms, testing your surveys, testing your downloads, testing your phone numbers. I mean, things can and do go wrong, which is why that daily stand up where you just say how many leads you got, how many of those leads were engaged, how many of those engaged leads were qualified, and how many of those qualified leads were signed. You're going to notice very quickly if everybody says 3 or 4 every single day and all of a sudden they say 1, we should be raising a flag at that moment to say we need to investigate a bit. And that's what all this data is ultimately doing. It's helping us act before we lose any of the traction that we hopefully have generated in marketing.
Well, and there are two common themes that I'm seeing come up again and again as we talk through this. And one is urgency, because everybody who is calling this law firm is having one of the worst days of their lives. And
It's
they
one of my the foundations of intake. Nobody calls a law firm on because they're having a good day.
exactly. Nobody's like, "Man, I just had this great sandwich. Let me tell you about it."
Right.
No, they're
New
calling because they're hurting, and it's either, they are physically in pain or one of their family members really needs your help or has passed.
Something's gone wrong.
Something's gone
Something
horribly
has
wrong,
gone wrong, and you
and
are the first responder.
you're the first responder, and they need your help now. And
Mhm.
so they're not gonna go through a phone tree. They're not going to sit and wait around for somebody to call them back. They're gonna pick up the phone and call someone who's available now.
Yeah.
And
Now.
so you need to make sure that your law firm is equipped to handle those right now moments, both in terms of having people available to take the call, but also, as you said, making sure that your technology is up and running so that it can react with the same urgency. They're not going to wait
Well,
for you to fix your intake on your computer. Like,
and they don't care. I mean, that you've lost their trust. If even if you have a referral, if you call and the call isn't answered quickly, let me tell you, 20 seconds. It takes only about 20 seconds for a phone to ring 3 times,
Mhm.
and more people hang up after that third ring. They're like, "Well, I guess they're not there." And they move on. And I can tell you, I had a personal experience that after all these years of preaching about never missing a call, they move on, blah, blah, blah. Well, one day I had this urgent need. We had a puppy, and the puppy was now a dog, but the neighbors also got puppies. And so my dog was wandering, and that terrible feeling as a neighbor when your neighbor says, "You guys ever considered an electric fence?"
Oh,
Broke my heart. So I come inside. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, we need an electric fence." I now know an electric fence is about a $3,000 investment for a property my size. And so I Googled electric fence in near me, and I called the first one that came up.
yeah.
Got voicemail. Didn't even bother leaving a message, moved on. Second one, got voicemail. Didn't bother leaving a message, moved on. Third one, didn't answer. I got an immediate text message that let me know I'm sorry I missed your call. I will call you right back. I'm like, okay, this one might be listening to my intake lessons. But I was like, holy cow, I was a $3,000 client that 3 people just missed.
Yeah.
And the first one to respond to me was the second one I called and the one who ultimately got my business. So 3 people had a chance at a $3,000 very easy sale that day. Let me tell you, I was like, "Can you get it in? Can you get it in today?" And that was it. They got my business. And so that experience for me was an eye opener that like, wow, there really is no brand loyalty. I had heard of invisible fence. I didn't care.
Yeah.
I just needed this problem solved. Now, here's the other thing I think I tell intake teams all the time. I was dealing with that, and it wasn't a big problem. I mean, it was a problem, but I wasn't physically hurt. I wasn't suffering a loss. I wasn't mourning. I wasn't missing a paycheck. Like, I had none of those issues that come with somebody who's hiring a lawyer, a personal injury lawyer, somebody who's been in an injury, in an accident. And so, I just needed to get this done. Now, layer on top of all of that, somebody who is physically in pain and who is fearful of the outcome of this injury, worried about maybe having to have surgery, worried that they're not going to be able to collect a paycheck. How are we going to replace the car? So you're dealing with somebody who is in what I always consider an emotionally compromised state.
Yeah.
But here's the good news. We know that. Okay. You know that nobody calls a law firm because they're having a good day. The one exception may be somebody who won a lottery ticket and wants to protect themselves. That one we can handle. The fact that we knowingly are answering the phone to somebody in need changes everything. If we let this person down, if we don't answer the call quickly, if we don't respond in a very timely manner, if we say we'll call back and we don't, if we drop the ball on any of those things, when dealing with someone who is emotionally vulnerable, the consequences are steep. You really fracture the trust of somebody in that situation far more than in a typical client service situation. So, like I said, the biggest issue I see is not meeting the client's needs first. And the first thing that people need is responsiveness.
And I would say that very closely behind that, in my experience, is that empathy needs
Oh
to
gosh.
come in right next to it. Because as you mentioned, people are not calling because they are really wanting to fill out an intake. They are calling
Yeah.
because they're having a problem.
Yeah.
And with one of my clients, and we review some of their calls from time to time with their LSA accounts, we noticed that one of the intake people was kind of dropping the ball with the empathy piece. A
Yeah.
mother had just lost her son in a motorcycle accident, and she's calling and just pouring her heart out, going, "This has happened to my son. I don't know what to do." And I'm, in a panic state. Well, she didn't say she was in a panic state, but she was. And
Right.
the intake specialist just said, "Okay, what's your phone number?"
I was gonna say, Lindsay, I feel I had this exact call. Somebody who said their son was killed in an accident, and the exact response of the receptionist was, "And can I have your name, please?" And it just I have played that recording for groups many times because I tell them, take that exact interaction and put it online at the grocery store or sitting next to someone in a coffee shop. Would you ever respond to somebody saying, "My child was killed in an accident," with "and your name, please"? Okay. So we have to hire the right people. And the reason I'm saying that as opposed to we need to act with empathy that is forced or inauthentic can do more harm than good.
Yeah.
So you don't want somebody who's reading off a script, "I'm so sorry for your loss." That's even worse than nothing at all.
Right.
So you've got to hire the right people. Make sure that you are hiring people who do genuinely want to help others, who recognize what they're coming, what they're encountering when they get on the phone with someone, and who have like the emotional intelligence to be empathetic, not just because the boss said so or the script says it, but because they truly do feel that way. And I've done this great lesson on empathy, and the word empathy means by nature that we need to connect with ourselves, even that we need to find something in ourselves that says, "I know this feeling and I need to solve this because this is a terrible feeling I know from experience." And if you don't hire somebody who's able to dig deep and connect with their own personal experience to this person, then we're going to miss the opportunity to engage people in a meaningful way. And that's what it's ultimately about. This is, which Lindsay, we're talking for a while already, but we haven't even touched on AI in intake And that's the one that just makes my skin crawl, is we've just spent the last decade talking about empathy, and now you wanna, hop in with your robots who, I get it that they can act empathetic, but they're inhuman.
Right.
So, how do you make a human connection when you're inhuman? And I've written plenty on it, so you can visit my website, to hear my musings on AI and intake.
Oh, and I am so glad to hear you say that because I have had horror stories with some of my clients trying AI,
Yeah,
and
no,
and
they're
it's
trying,
and I get
and
it. It's fun. There are cool new toys out there, and the idea of being able to streamline this process
would be
and
great.
not have to worry about, training humans and hiring the right humans. It sounds like such a great shortcut. But when you
In
have
the right places, and for the right purposes. And, the one advice I give everybody when they are evaluating anything, but especially AI, is, why am I doing this? And
Mhm.
the answer I never get is because it provides a better service to my clients and prospects. And if that isn't the answer, then you need to consider whether or not you should do it. Um, again, I think that presentation is on YouTube as well. I do very much think that the future of intake is AI powered. There's a lot of benefit to the effective application of AI in the intake department. But so far as I'm concerned, it is not answering the phones.
It's
And I know a lot
not
of people will be disappointed to hear that, but
it's just not there yet, and AI is in such it's in its infancy,
it
and
is. You're all living in beta.
when you're trusting it with something as crucial as the turning point of your marketing to a lead into a case, that is a lot of trust to be
A
putting
lot of
into
trust and
something
a
that
lot of
isn't developed.
value.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I always say, we're not selling ice cream cones here. So, if you wanna sell ice cream cones using an AI agent, great, have
great.
at it. Like I always say, I expect it when I'm dealing with Amazon, Google, uh, I get it. Like, that's just gonna that's the future. But we have one of the industry's highest cost verticals because of the value of every lead.
Yes.
And I would not hand that off to AI if I were you.
No, and
And I
I've
think the
seen some
people who,
nightmares with it where
yeah.
I
Oh,
had, clients who have lost thousands of dollars in cases because
mm,
somebody recognized that it was an AI agent
and they
and
don't
hung
like
up.
it. They don't like it. And that's, well, so Lindsay, I did a presentation for NTL a couple months ago about AI and intake, and they found, this provider found that, uh, if they didn't announce that it was AI, uh, there was a 70% greater uh, follow through, 70% greater completion rate. And so, hands down, people were willing to do it if they didn't know. And I think that that is a real question of transparency and trust in a relationship, that you're trying to build, not just something transactional, solve this problem, buy this ice cream cone, but somebody who you are going to have a long-term relationship with, become a referral partner, all the things that are supposed to happen after that after that phone call. So I then think you have to have another moment with yourself, asking the very important question of, what do we value here? And at the end of the day, this is a service-based business. And if you're not saying, because it serves my clients and prospects better, and that may be the answer when it comes to different languages, when it comes to the middle of the night, when it comes to staffing challenges, that may be the answer. But I've yet to have one attorney give that answer to me.
Right, and yeah, nobody is saying because my client wants this. My client would rather talk to a robot.
And that day may come, I hate to say, but
Yeah, well, and how many times have we been on a phone tree and we're, like, screaming into our phone, "Representative, representative." Well, your prospective clients aren't gonna do that. They're gonna hang up and call someone that they can talk to.
and the reputational risk is increased.
Yes.
The idea of communicating with a chatbot, we still see fantastic completion rates on chatbots. When the data shows that when we transition from chat to voice, the expectation and therefore the stakes are much higher. So if you piss somebody off in that setting, the consequences are more significant. And it's just, it's hard to come back from that. If you get someone who's like, well, your person told me blah 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 blah, and you have to start making excuses for your robots, it's going to be tough to come back from that. So I just, again, ask yourself, why are we doing this? And there are some good reasons, and I get it, cost and staffing and all those things. There are some applicable use cases that I can get behind. Generally replacing your intake team with robots, we're not there yet. And
No.
the interesting thing you said, I've been saying for years now, we're living in beta. I got a phone call this morning from an AI company that I tested with one of my clients probably about 6 months ago. And this representative called in and said, Kerri, I know you stopped using the service. I just wanted to see if you found anything. And I said, you know what, Ryan, we haven't, because quite frankly, at that point, nothing met our standards. And he said, well, you know what? We didn't either. And he said, but we've come a long way since then. And look, there's a rush to market with any technology. And so I think a lot of people came out of the gate, but let's have this conversation 6, 18, 24 months from now. We may be feeling very different than we do now, but at this moment in time, I'm not ready to hand it off, and I don't think you should be either.
Well, and I think that it can be scaffolded. And so I have a vision for how AI and intake can work together, where if you have AI as not just recording the phone call, and giving the notes back on it, but
Mhm.
being able to prompt questions that your AI or that
Yes,
your
I love
intake
that.
agent might be able to use. And I know that they're
Right,
using
or
that for
here's how to
depositions
handle
now.
this objection, and make sure you don't forget to do this. There are going to be great use cases,
Yeah.
and how wonderful that we're still in the infancy, because we've got time ahead of us, which is both scary and exciting.
Right. And there are some great technologies out there. And I know that we talked a little bit in the beginning about making sure that you have a lead capture system. That way things aren't getting missed. And AI can be integrated into that in some really positive ways. And so yeah, I know we're running out of time here, but I would love to hear more on any tools that you do recommend, especially for capturing leads and making sure that those are converting.
So I mentioned Loop. Loop is the system that I built as an intake manager, as an intake manager running the marketing as well. So um, I like to use what we call smart marketing. And
Love
if
it.
you have an intelligent intake system that is actually leveraging AI and communicating with your campaigns, you can actually drive better results from your campaigns. So, in addition to solving the issues of intake, Loop is also improving your marketing by virtue of using it, which is just incredible. So, I'm still a huge fan of that. And like I said, while I don't believe intake is being replaced by AI, intake is certainly AI powered. And by that, I mean, I want all the listening technology baked in, because I want to be able to review the calls that really require my attention. I want to make sure that I'm finding all those teachable moments from my weekly trainings. I want to make sure that I'm giving my team great feedback, because I still am very much wed to the idea of using humans. And so AI tools are listening tools in particular are where I really want intake teams focused on AI application. And then with both those, I want to make sure that we're getting accurate data. And so I build the dashboards into all of this as well, so that every level from the marketing to the intake to the attorney, they're looking at those KPIs that we consider the most important. How many leads? How many leads were engaged, i.e., not unresponsive? How many engaged leads were qualified? How many qualified leads were signed? How much was our cost per acquisition? And what is the ROI? So if everyone has the data, the management system, we're creating this very tight feedback loop, which is going to help us drive better results. So in the end, to kind of put a bow on all this for you, Lindsey, good intake, okay? Because everybody has intake, but not everybody has good intake. Good intake boils down to three critical things. You need to have a fantastic process, and where AI is in use and what phone systems, you got to get into all of the weeds on that, but you need a good process. Number two, you need quality call handling by trained humans. Okay, that's my opinion. And number three, you need dedicated management who's going to oversee all of this, hold the people accountable, test the forms, ring the phones, track the data. All of that combined is going to result in really good intake.
And those are absolutely definitely the three pillars that everybody should be focusing on. Spend some time with it, have some conversations about it. And I know that you're going to be getting more into this in PILMA, at PILMA in May. So excited to hear you talk and listen to more of your presentation on how intake, really good intake, impact.
Good intake.
Good intake can make or break a law firm and the leads that are coming in and the qualified leads that are coming in and that conversion rate. So,
Yeah.
Kerri, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been an
Pleasure.
absolute pleasure having you. That's going to wrap up this episode of the Personal Injury Marketing Minute. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss other great episodes, especially on the Spotlight on PILMA series. We have some of the best minds in the legal industry coming together to help you streamline your law firm. And if you are a personal injury firm that's looking to grow your marketing and boost your qualified leads, feel free to reach out to me at lindsey@optimizemyfirm.com. And again, Kerri, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I'll wait to see you in San Antonio, Lindsey. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.